In the early years of the 20th century, in the lush green forests that separated the boundaries of Nepal and northern India, there lived a creature that would come to be remembered not for its beauty or power, but for the sheer scale of horror it unleashed upon human civilization. It was a tigress, not an ordinary one, but a beast so cunning, so bloodthirsty, and so fearless that it earned a place in the darkest annals of history. Over 400 human beings, men, women, and children, would fall victim to her fangs and claws before her reign of terror came to an end. But this was no legend. It was real, and it unfolded in broad daylight. It all began in the jungles of western Nepal. At first, the disappearances were scattered. A woman who left to fetch water never returned. A woodcutter failed to come home at sunset. But no one suspected a tiger. At least, not yet. When the first remains were discovered, bodies torn apart, skulls smashed, limbs missing, panic slowly crept into the hearts of villagers. They had known the forests all their lives, lived beside them, even respected their wild neighbors. But this was different. The killings were too frequent, too specific, and more chilling than anything else. They were happening during the day.
It soon became clear that it was the work of a tigress, one that had chosen humans as her prey. She did not hunt deer or boar. She did not hide in shadows. She came in daylight, sometimes right up to the edge of villages, sometimes venturing inside, unafraid. The terror she spread was unlike anything anyone had seen. She was not just a predator. She had become a phantom. Her presence haunted the villagers long before she struck. You could feel her in the silence of the jungle, in the way birds flew off suddenly, in the hush that fell when footsteps approached.
Efforts were made to stop her. The Nepalese government sent hunters and soldiers. Traps were laid, rifles were aimed, but she avoided them all with frightening intelligence. She changed routes. She moved in patterns that no tracker could predict. She would travel up to 20 miles in a single night and strike again by morning. She had turned killing into an art and fear into her greatest weapon. Eventually, her presence became unbearable. The villages were emptying out. People refused to leave their homes. Fields were left uncultivated. Children no longer played outside. Entire communities began to migrate. And so, in desperation, a massive military operation was launched. Hundreds of men beat drums and lit fires, forming a wall of noise and chaos to push the tigress out of the country. It worked, but only partially. She was forced across the border into India, into the district of Champawat. And there, her carnage only grew worse. Now in Indian territory, the tigress became bolder. She struck with terrifying precision. She would pick off travelers on lonely roads, young girls collecting firewood, shepherds watching their flocks. She would kill, drag the body into the jungle, and vanish like a ghost. Often the villagers could hear her growls at night, not far from their homes, a low guttural sound that froze blood in the veins. Sometimes she left behind nothing but bloodstains and footprints. Sometimes she left behind the half-eaten remains, as if to taunt the survivors. The number of her victims rose rapidly, one after the other. Dozens turned into hundreds. The locals began to say she wasn't a tiger, but something demonic. How could one creature outsmart so many people, evade so many traps, and still continue to kill? How could she appear and disappear at will without being seen? Stories began to circulate. She could fly. She could vanish. She was a cursed spirit in tiger's form. But the truth, as it often is, was far simpler and more disturbing. The tigress had a broken canine tooth. When her body was later examined, it became clear that she had sustained injuries, likely from a hunter's bullet or a trap, that made it difficult for her to hunt her usual prey. Her ability to take down swift animals like deer or boar had been compromised. In desperation, she turned to the easiest target available: human beings. Slow, unarmed, predictable. And once she developed a taste for human flesh, there was no turning back. Word of her horrors reached the colonial British authorities, and that's when they turned to one man. A man who had spent his life in the forests. A man who had a unique relationship with nature.
His name was Jim Corbett. Jim Corbett was not a mere hunter. He was a tracker, a naturalist, and someone who deeply respected the balance of the wild. He did not kill for sport. He killed only when there was no other option, when man and beast came into unavoidable conflict. And when he heard about the Tigress of Champawat, he agreed to take on the most dangerous assignment of his life. He arrived in the area, studied the terrain, listened to villagers, examined the sites of attacks. He followed her prints. He read the broken twigs, the bent grass, the drop of blood here, a paw print there. He pieced together her movements like a detective in a murder mystery. But she was always one step ahead, always vanishing before he could reach her. Until one day, fate gave him an opportunity. It happened near the village of Pali. A teenage girl had gone out to collect wood. She never came back. Her scream echoed through the trees, and when people reached the place, they found her slippers, blood, and drag marks heading into the forest. Corbett followed those signs deep into a ravine, alone, his rifle loaded, heart pounding. And then he saw her. Massive, majestic, terrifying. The tigress was feeding on the girl's body, and for a moment she looked straight into Corbett's eyes. There was no fear, only challenge. In that instant, hunter and hunted stared at one another. Corbett raised his rifle and fired. The first bullet struck her, but she didn't go down. She turned and ran. Corbett followed. A second shot, then a third. She collapsed. Silence. The reign of terror was over. When villagers heard the news, they wept in relief. People came from far and wide to see the creature that had haunted their dreams for years. And as Corbett stood over her lifeless body, he did not feel triumph. He felt sorrow. Sorrow for a beast that had not been born evil, but had been broken by wounds, pushed to desperation, and forced into a path of blood. The final count of her victims was 436 human lives, making her the deadliest man-eating tiger in recorded history. Her skull was studied, her broken teeth preserved as proof of her condition. And Jim Corbett, shaken but resolute, continued his work. Not as a killer of wildlife, but as a protector. In later years, he would campaign for the creation of wildlife sanctuaries, and today, India's famous Corbett National Park bears his name. The story of the Champawat tigress endures not just because of the number of people she killed, but because of the questions she raised. What happens when the natural balance is disrupted? When man wounds an animal, and the animal turns against man? Who is the true villain in such stories? In the end, she was not a monster. She was a tiger who suffered, adapted, and survived the only way she knew. Her legend reminds us of the thin line between the wild and the civilized, and how easily, when that line is crossed, even the most beautiful creatures can become our greatest fear.